Hello there guys and welcome back to the channel. Right, so I realized I didn't do October's tier list, and October is still technically not over, and truth to be told, I do like to do these tier lists in the middle of the month or the latter half, because that is exactly when I can get a better understanding of the new champions normally. But as always, we do need to go through the mandatory disclaimers here. This tier list is a mixture of my own personal views and current game relevance and trends, and believe it or not, that is exactly what affects the value of the champion. It is the content that is being released. It is also obviously the compatibility with the existing content and many different things. Please do not use this tier list as a point of argument. It is more of a food for thought. Each summoner has different needs and preferences that far outweigh the importance of this list. Please rank champions that will help you get where you are trying to go, and do not blindly follow this list or any other, especially the last point. It doesn't matter how a champion sits on a tier list. What it matters is whether the champion will do what you need it to do. If you need lines for defense, then you need ranked defenders. If you need lines for attackers, then you need to focus on that for the specific offensive tactics. If you need battlegrounds champions, then again you're going to be looking at the more popular battlegrounds champions. This tier list is obviously primarily focused on offensive use rather than defense, and all champions included in the top list are available as 6 stars at the very least, and the ones that aren't somewhere here at the bottom. There's only 3 of them left. Right, all that being said, there aren't too many changes in the month of October. So first and foremost, we're just gonna go through the tiers themselves, what each of them mean and what has changed, and obviously the new champions and additions. The top of the game means just that. These are the champions that are best of the best, that will almost always do well in pretty much all the game modes. There might be a game mode that they do not do that well, but in general, these are champions that you can always rank at any given point as long as you have learned how to play them, and they're going to be safe bet that they are very good champions. Meta stands for most effective tactics available, and that is just that. Those are the champions that you will still likely see in all of the more competitive game modes, all of the new content, so on and so forth, and these are not quite at the very tippy top of their respective classes and the game, but still more often than not very valuable investment. And then we have frequently useful, which I think is a self-explanatory term, champions that are not necessarily at the top of the class, but you will find use for them in several game modes or some of the game modes under some specific circumstances relatively frequently. One champion that I realized I needed to change up, and I didn't, is Ronan, because Ronan is becoming more and more frequently useful. I don't think just useful cuts it for the guy anymore. But speaking of useful, that's basically the same thing, just less often. These are champions that are not going to be anybody's, at the top of their list. These champions can still be people's favorites. I have champions that are, some of the most enjoyable champions for me personally to play at, occasionally useful. And there is a difference between liking a champion, loving a champion, and thinking that they are the best thing ever. For instance, I absolutely love playing with Carnage, but it's a fun thing. It's just an enjoyable thing. I fully realize that Carnage isn't, as good as Hyperion, for instance. And these champions are useful. You can rank them. You will be able to, do things with them. But there are just better options, objectively speaking, available. However, always remember that this is a game, and if you do enjoy the champion, you should rank that champion. And most importantly, a lot of people also don't realize is that if you are investing a lot of time and effort in this champion, you will be able to do better with that champion than most other people would be. For instance, if you really like Emma Frost, and if you play her day in and day out, and if you know exactly what to do in every single matchup, you will get much better results with that champion, thus for you subjectively making that champion appear much better than they would necessarily be. And that's kind of like the beauty of this game. Once you actually pay attention and use these champions more and more, you can do more with them. And then occasionally useful. This is one of the lower tiers again. As I said, these are typically champions that can come occasionally useful in specific circumstances. Something like Yondu, for instance, when we have our invade metas with some additional nodes that, make him a relatively solid choice offensively, or We have Rogue in case, there's some buffs to steal. She can be quite crazy if you're skilled enough with her. Proxima Midnight, if we ever get a content that she can fully open up, she would be great for that. Ultimately, that would not change her valuation because, it would be just occasionally when she becomes useful. And the useless, borderline, unplayable, insignificant tier is the champions just that, are the failure stories of the contest, that are the least successful champions in game. In most cases, they are just severely outdated, being some of the earlier champions in the game with minimal kits that nobody pays attention to. Right, all that said, first and foremost, we do have promotion for Photon. I do think that I'm settling on Photon as a top 3 science champion because if she remains unscathed, Photon's just brutal. Offensively and defensively. Honestly, she's a crazy good attacker, and she's arguably the best defender right now. And yeah, there's not much else to say. That Photon is crazy good because she has so many failsafes on offense and so many tricky abilities on defense. She switches off your willpower, so you can't even heal in that fight. So any chip damage you take remains, which is also super important. For instance, stuff like Lines War, or especially in Battlegrounds, because that affects scoring. Very easy, for opponents to take some damage against her. And yeah, I think Photon, at this point, I'm willing to stick my neck out for her and put her at the top of the class. Still keeping Hulk there as well. There could be discussion, obviously, for Silk or Titania as well, joining there quite soon. But I do think that a lot of this also has to do with the decay tactic currently being in effect in Battlegrounds. And that is one of these things where obviously these lists are affected by current game relevance and trends, but it is different from kind of understanding the overvaluation of a champion because of a single meta or a single piece of content. And currently it just so happens that obviously we have Alliance War and Battlegrounds gonna have the same tactic, and a lot of champions are getting a lot more love and power than they normally would be, being capable of doing a lot more fights than they otherwise would be. Which is a reason why I think, for instance, Morbius is getting quite a lot of love, perhaps more than he normally would. And speaking of that, there are no more changes to the top of the game. And I don't think there are any meaningful changes to the meta tier as well. We do need to talk about the 2 new additions to the game, and one of them is, in fact, Morbius itself, and I put him in frequently useful tier, which I think is, about as well as I typically start off almost any champion. But with Morbius, we do really need to be careful whether what he's doing right now in, let's say, Battlegrounds or Alliance War is the result of him as a champion or is the result of him as a tactic attacker. So that is still a very generous, as I said, about as high of a starting position as I typically give the champions. But I'm definitely going to be keeping an eye out for him because my first and initial expectation of Morbius is the fact that he's going to be quite popular, quite relevant for the first 6 or so weeks, whilst we have Decay in Battlegrounds, whilst we have Decay in Alliance War. And then I kind of expect him to phase out a little bit. If I'm being completely honest, I do think that ultimately I would be not putting Morbius in top 10 skill science class. But we're going to see where he lands and discuss that. The other problem child is Werewolf by Night. And Werewolf by Night, this is, again, me perhaps being more cautiously optimistic. Realistically, as of right now, he shouldn't be there. He should be in useful or occasionally useful tier. But that is kind of the problem because everything that surrounds Werewolf by Night is kind of switched off because he's a Decay champion. So on defense, he's significantly less useful because he isn't necessarily as tanky as like a Sasquatch or something else. And all of his defensive abilities get switched off by Decay because his regen, gets despaired away with the Withers. His power gains also get, taken away with Withers, and Slow is taking away his Unstoppable. He's a really, really big kind of like vanilla defender, and what's making it worse, even the ruptures that he inflicts by the block is mitigated by Decay. So, currently, I have genuinely no idea how well he's going to do. And I don't think it's possible to actually judge him realistically in any kind of competitive situations, because the same thing He's an Alliance War. He's a Decay champion, which means, you know, sorry, he's a Sugar Pill defender, which means every Decay champion is going to absolutely destroy him. No, fair enough. Listening to my own arguments here, I am going to move him down to useful tier for now, just because it's impossible to say where he's going to be. I hope that we're going to end up, you know, pulling him up a tier. I hope that he's going to be a consistent feature of the game, but it's just impossible to say because the tactic completely shuts him down. Now, a few more demotions as well. I did take down Rocket Raccoon and Guillotine 2099. Realistically, Rocket Raccoon hasn't really been doing anything in the game, and we kind of got excited after his buff, and he seemed like a very solid nuke, but there's just so many better options, and he just isn't quite cutting it in majority of the cases. And similar with Guillotine 2099, there's just not much that you'd ever really do with her in the game. So I took them down from frequently useful to occasionally useful. Mantis got a slight promotion from useful to frequently useful because we have been getting significantly more Mantis love. Sandman is somebody that I definitely do need to keep an eye out for. We'll see what his buff situation is. Shocker, similarly, we have the delay in the buff. But that more or less is the current situation with the tier list. Let me know what you guys are thinking. Obviously, next month we are getting Shield and Kushala, which will be skill and mystic champions. Hopefully they do hit the ground running in the contest, and there will be some more structural and frequent changes coming to this tier list. I do not want to go into the details quite yet, but with me starting to work on the matchup spreadsheet, which is, you know, primarily Battlegrounds related, and just checking how many of the matchups each of these champions do, I do think that it could be quite interesting cross-reference with the tier list and see if I can combine these two sheets and kind of like add these numbers or add some of the indicators there for the tier list as well. But that is something that, you know, is going to be quite technically challenging in a sense, and I'll definitely need to mess around with that. But hopefully there's going to be something interesting and cool coming. Let me know what you guys think about the tier list, which champions should be lower, which champions should be higher. Always, please do remember to be respectful. Please do keep in mind that, as I said in the beginning, this is a mixture of my own personal thoughts and opinions with the current game relevance and trends. And also the fact that if you are a major fan of a specific champion, you will obviously, you know, do better with it than most and think that the champion has to go higher. But it doesn't necessarily work always as, you know, straightforward. So, I'm always willing to listen to the feedback, to the criticism, to the advice and everything else. Just keep it respectful and, well, don't be a donkey. But I know you guys won't be because you guys are awesome. I'm going to catch you guys soon. Bye-bye. Hello there, guys, and welcome back to the channel. So we have all the information about